You know how people say the silence of the countryside is relaxing? That's a lie. Too much silence gives room to hear what shouldn't exist. When I moved to my grandfather's farm, I thought it would be a break, a way to get my head straight after the divorce and the chaos of the city. A place with the smell of wet soil, the sound of crickets, and no phone notifications. But the countryside has its own sounds, and some of them, listen back. The house sat in the middle of a plain, surrounded by acres of cornfields stretching as far as the eye could see. It was an old property, built with heavy wood and windows that creaked in the wind. At night, the darkness was so complete that even the moonlight seemed shy. I liked that, until I started noticing the lights. The first time was early Friday morning. I woke up to a faint glow outside the window. I figured it was a car on the road, but there wasn't a road anywhere nearby. I looked again. Small lights danced over the cornfield, like lanterns moving slowly in a line. I thought it might be hunters or bored teenagers, but the lights were synchronized, like someone was conducting an invisible ritual. The next day, I went to the spot where I had seen them. Nothing, just tall corn and damp silence. No footprints, no tire marks. But the air felt different there, colder, and for some reason, the leaves were burned in an uneven circle, as if something had stayed there too long. The second night, the lights came back. Same time, same pattern. But this time, one of them rose from the ground to the sky, vanishing into the air. I started recording with my phone, but the video came out completely black. No light, no sound, as if the device had simply refused to capture it. That's when I noticed something that still gives me chills when I remember it. The light closest to the window seemed to be looking at me. It blinked 3 times. Then all the others answered. I ran downstairs, opened the front door, and shouted. The sound vanished into the wind. The lights disappeared. For a few minutes, I just stood there, heart racing, phone shaking in my hand, and then I heard something from the field. A dry crack, like a blade snapping. The next day, I found a broken mirror in the middle of the cornfield, small, with an old frame, and on the glass, you could still see a faint glow blinking. Do you want me to continue to part 2? Where the lights start interacting with the character, more psychological, with a growing sense of isolation? I can increase the pace of the suspense, with touches of paranoia and rural realism. In the following days, I tried to pretend nothing had happened. I avoided looking out the window, locked the door at night, and left the TV on just to hear some human voice. But the countryside doesn't sleep, it listens. On Sunday, I woke up to a sound coming from inside the walls, a low, steady hum, almost electric. I went to check the fuse box, but everything was fine. When I opened the window, I realized the birds weren't singing. No sound, no insects, not even the wind, just the hum. I stepped out onto the porch and saw something strange in the fields. The rows of corn, which should have been perfectly straight, were now curved, like someone had drawn circles during the night. In the center of the largest one, there was a mark shaped like a hand, too large to be human. I went back inside, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was the wind, or the cattle. But when I checked the barn, the cows were restless, stomping, pushing the gates, staring fixedly at a single spot on the wall. A mirror, the same one I'd found in the cornfield. Someone, or something, had placed it there. I covered the glass with a cloth, but I swear I heard a cracking sound from inside it, like ice splitting. The sound repeated 3 times. 3, just like the blinking lights from the night before. That night, I decided to keep watch from the porch. I grabbed a flashlight, strong coffee, and sat down with Duke, my dog, lying at my feet. Around 2 in the morning, the hum returned. Now it came from underground, deep and resonant, vibrating in my chest. Duke began to growl, first low, then frantic, until he bolted toward the cornfield. I ran after him, but the darkness swallowed every step. The lights came back, 1, 2, 3, in a straight line ahead, and in the middle of them stood a tall, still shadow, shaped like a man wearing a hat. But when the light moved, I realized the hat wasn't on his head, it was the head. The body was long, the legs thin, the face non-existent, just a smooth surface, reflecting the flashlight's beam. And the worst part, the reflection I saw wasn't mine. I ran back to the house, locking every door and window. But when I looked through the glass, the figure was still there, standing at the edge of the field. And behind it, dozens of other lights appeared, one by one, forming a perfect line. The entire field was lit up. The next morning, I decided to leave. No explanations, no goodbyes, no looking back. I threw some clothes on the truck seat and drove down the dirt road toward the nearest town. I looked at the dashboard clock. The hands weren't moving. I checked my phone, no signal. And when I glanced in the rearview mirror, I swear I saw the farmhouse gate right behind me, the same one I'd left 20 minutes ago. I stopped the truck and got out, walked back down the road, trying to make sense of it. The ground began to vibrate. The corn swayed in waves, like the entire field was breathing. I tried to run back to the truck, but the engine wouldn't start. I looked through the windshield. The rearview mirror was tilted, pointing straight at me, and in the reflection, I saw something that froze me completely. There was a hand on my shoulder. I turned quickly, nothing, but the touch was still there, cold, damp, like someone had just stepped out of the rain. Then, a voice low close, right by my ear. The field remembers, Ethan. The field sees. I ran. I don't know for how long. The sound of my own footsteps echoed with a delay, as if the ground was repeating every movement 1 second later. And then the sound stopped. When I lifted my head, I realized I was back on the farmhouse porch, out of breath, covered in dust. The truck was parked, door wide open. On the radio, a song was playing by itself, an old, scratched country tune, looping the same verse over and over. You can't leave what remembers your name. That night, I slept with every light in the house turned on. But when I woke up, the switch was off, and still, the room was glowing. The first thing I did was try to call someone, anyone. Phone, radio, cell, nothing worked. The silence was so heavy I could hear the hum of electricity running through the wires outside. And even without wind, the fence trembled slightly, as if something was breathing on the other side. That's when I saw the envelope on the porch. Yellowed paper, my name written by hand, Ethan Ward. No signature, no return address. I opened it carefully. Inside was a typewritten report with the seal of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Year, 1967. Project Harvest 9. Field phase. Isolated location, Hollow Ridge County. Persistent subterranean bioluminescent phenomenon. Results, inconclusive. Full property quarantine and collection of human samples recommended after the event. Human samples. My blood ran cold. On the last page, there was a black and white photograph of the same farm I was in, same barn, same cornfield, except completely barren, and in the middle of the field, a white, spiral-shaped light. Beneath it, people in lab coats motionless, as if they'd been petrified mid-harvest. I turned the photo over and saw something scribbled in pencil. Do not look at the light. When the ground breathes, I ran straight to the barn, grabbed a sledgehammer and started hitting. With every blow, the humming grew louder. It felt like the entire farm was reacting to the noise, as if I was waking something up. When I finally broke the lock, hot, humid air rose from the hatch. The smell, mold, gasoline, and burned flesh. I pointed my flashlight and descended. Metal stairs, long, endless. Then the floor, concrete, but covered with something that pulsed faintly, as if alive. The walls were filled with notes and diagrams, old photographs, scratched out names, dates, and in the center, a phrase painted in red ink: the bodies are the seed. A dripping sound came from one corner, but when I pointed the light, I saw it wasn't water. It was a milky substance, dripping from something hanging from the ceiling, something that looked human. Thin arms, gray skin, and a face that vaguely resembled Duke, my dog. I stepped back and tripped over something metallic, a cassette tape. I took it to the house and put it in the reel player. The voice crackled, but it was audible. The field doesn't just consume, it reflects. The roots absorb what we bury in them: flesh, memories, names, and they return it in another form. The experiment didn't fail. It simply woke up. The tape clicked, and then a second voice came in, weak, gasping. If anyone finds this, don't go back to the surface at night. The sound stopped. Before I could even breathe, I heard something outside. The sound of rustling plants. But this time, closer, and accompanied by footsteps. Someone, or something, was coming up from the field, heading toward me. I ran to the truck. The keys rattled in my hand, my heart pounding. But when I turned the ignition, the engine coughed and died. I tried again, nothing. I looked through the windshield and saw it. Between the rows of corn, something moved. Slow, clumsy, like it was still learning to walk. A human-like silhouette, but stretched. Its arms reached down to its knees, and its head was covered with thin, pulsing roots. And where a face should have been, a pale, bluish light glowed. Alive, I jumped out of the truck, panicking, and ran toward the road. But after a few minutes, I noticed something impossible. The fence, the fallen tree, the curve in the hill. They were repeating. I was walking in circles. I fell to my knees, screaming. And that's when I heard the voice, "Low, human. Screaming won't help. It doesn't hear. It only feels what's born." I turned and saw a man standing a few meters away. He wore a farmer's jumpsuit, dirty, torn, but far too new to be old. His face was aged but wrong, as if time had passed through him and then gone backward. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a deep breath and replied with an empty smile. "My name is Arthur Ashcroft. I was the head of Project Harvest." The name hit me like a punch. It was the same one from the tape, the same scientist who narrated the experiments back in the 60s. But that was over 50 years ago. He nodded slowly. "Time doesn't pass here. It germinates." Arthur led me to an old wooden shed, covered in vines. Inside, everything seemed preserved, like an abandoned lab frozen in time. Metal tables, jars of cloudy liquid, and a large glass container in the center, filled with dark soil that shifted gently, as if breathing. We thought it was just a fungus, but it wasn't. It was the soil. Alive, intelligent. When we fed it organic matter, it responded. It spoke to us. It asked to see the sky. I was speechless. Arthur went on. "So we opened the soil. We let the field breathe, and it never slept again." Suddenly, the ground began to shake. Jars fell from the shelves. Outside, the sound of rustling plants grew louder, almost a subterranean roar. Arthur grabbed my arm tightly. His fingers were cold, stiff, almost stone. "You opened it again, didn't you?" "The hatch," I nodded. He closed his eyes, resigned. "Then it's going to plant you too." I ran. The wind carried the smell of the river and the sound of footsteps, multiple, uneven, coming from every direction. I crossed the cornfield, stumbling over roots, until I saw a faint light through the trees. The river. But something was wrong. The surface of the water reflected the sky, and at the same time, the inside of the barn, like two worlds overlapping. And there, in the reflection, Arthur was still standing, except his face wasn't the same anymore. His features had melted, and in place of his eyes, two small white flowers had bloomed. The sound of the field stopped, and, for a moment, the river breathed. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not river water, not wet soil. Iron, thick, acidic, like old blood mixed with rain. The water in front of me looked too fluid, but it didn't move. I reached out to touch the surface, and the reflection reacted before my fingers made contact. Arthur's face stared back at me, but he wasn't smiling anymore. "The field doesn't forget, Ethan. It just pretends to sleep." The voice came from everywhere, as if the wind had learned to speak. This time, there was no echo. It felt like the earth itself was talking, through the leaves, the roots, the air. I stepped back, and the ground gave way. I fell into a narrow, dark fissure, filled with roots that seemed to grab me. But they didn't hurt. They were pulling me, guiding me. When I opened my eyes, I was somewhere else. It was still the farm, but not like before. Everything looked newer. The fence was whole, the barn freshly painted, and on the horizon, the sun was rising for the first time in what felt like ages. And there were people, men and women working, smiling, harvesting the dark soil. They were singing a simple, repetitive, hypnotic melody. Ashcroft's harvest feeds the land, and the land feeds us again. That's when I saw Arthur, younger, energetic, wearing a white lab coat, observing everything with a notebook in hand. Behind him walked two men with clipboards and badges from the U.S. Department of Energy. They were discussing something about biological self-sufficiency and cognitive retention organisms. I wasn't just seeing the past. I was living it. I approached one of the workers. He lifted his head, and I froze. It was the sheriff. Younger, no wrinkles, but with the same tired eyes. "You new here?" he asked, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Before I could answer, a deep sound shook the ground, like subterranean thunder. People turned toward the field, alarmed. The soil was moving. It rippled, as if something massive was crawling beneath the earth. Arthur raised his hand, trying to calm everyone. "Don't be afraid. It's the cycle. It's the birth." But it wasn't birth. It was hunger. From the ground, roots began to emerge, thick, dark, coated with a viscous substance. They wrapped around people's legs, pulling them down. The song turned into screams. Men and women were dragged into the soil while Arthur watched, fascinated, taking notes. The soil chooses what it keeps, and what it rebirths. I ran, but the landscape around me folded and shifted, as if time itself was melting. The crops withered and regrew within seconds. The barn aged, collapsed, and rebuilt itself. And Arthur, he was always there, in every version of time. Older, younger, sometimes just a shadow. When I finally reached the hill, I realized something. There was no more sun. The sky was covered by a pale, pulsing light, the same one from the hatch. And then I saw it, at the center of the farm, where the earth boiled, a colossal metal structure, covered in roots and bones. It was the harvest core, the heart of Project Harvest. From inside it, a woman's voice whispered, "You were born from the field too, Ethan. Now the field wants you back." I looked down and saw hands, hundreds of them, emerging from the soil, all human, all reaching for the light. I screamed, but the sound vanished into the air, as if the world had forgotten how to echo. And then everything went dark. I woke to the sound of dripping dots, slow, steady drops echoing somewhere above me. It took me a moment to realize I was lying on a metallic floor, cold, uneven, covered with a thin layer of mud. The light came from emergency lamps flickering in irregular intervals. Each time they lit, I saw the same symbol painted on the walls, HO1 Harvest Initiative. The air was heavy, almost liquid. Breathing hurt. In the corner, there were crates with faded Department of Energy labels, eaten away by moisture. I opened one. Inside were several recording tapes dated 1978, stamped in red ink. Agricultural Consciousness Protocol Experiment 3. I placed the tape in a dusty player and hit play. Arthur Ashcroft's voice came through, younger, excited, almost euphoric. "Field report, day 143. The substrate responded. The soil doesn't just retain carbon, it absorbs electrical patterns, mental patterns, primitive consciousness traits. The field thinks." A click. Then, another voice, a woman's. "But how does it think? Or who does it think?" As Arthur laughed, but there was something sinister in that laugh. "It thinks as what we feed it." The sound cut. The tape stopped. I looked around. The metal floor was damp, but it wasn't just water. It was a thick, translucent substance that seemed to pulse faintly. When I touched it, a shiver ran up my arm, as if something had recognized me. And then the wall breathed. Literally. It expanded and contracted, exhaling warm vapor. From inside it, a shape began to press outward, a human silhouette trapped beneath the structure, struggling to emerge. But how could it? There were no doors. The only opening was sealed by black, pulsating roots. I started pulling them apart, and realized that inside each one, something was moving. Tiny flashes of light, or memories. Then one of them opened on its own. From inside, a photograph fell. Old. It showed Arthur and a dark-haired woman holding a baby. Written on the back, by hand, "Ethan, 1980. The breathing sound grew louder, ragged, almost human. The voice was inside my head now, echoing in a dissonant rhythm. I tried to run, but the floor shifted, forming patterns with the same living texture. A corridor opened before me, leading to a round, metal door, covered in strange symbols. I turned the handle. The door opened with a dry hiss, and what I saw took my breath away. It was a massive chamber, bathed in bluish light, with hundreds of cylindrical tanks connected by organic tubes. Inside each tank, something floated. Bodies, but they weren't dead. They moved. Their mouths opened silently, releasing bubbles. And from the depths of the chamber, the voice returned. Low, serene, almost maternal. "You are the perfect harvest, Ethan. Now the soil will bloom again." The blue light turned into pure white, and everything dissolved. I woke up again on the farm. The sun was rising behind the cornfield, and the sound of birds felt a fake, as if someone had placed a looping nature track in the background, badly sensed. I looked around. The truck was still there, leaning against the fence. The barn too. But something was different. The whole field seemed more alive. The leaves shimmered with a metallic hue, and the ground was breathing. When I entered the barn, I saw Arthur sitting on a rocking chair, but he didn't look old, nor young. It was something in between, as if time had blended his faces. He smiled, calm, with that look of someone who had always known everything. "Welcome back, Ethan." I looked at my hands. They were covered in a thin layer of gray dust, but it didn't fall off. It moved. It slid across my skin as if looking for a place to enter. "What am I?" I asked. Arthur stood up, walking slowly toward the window. Outside, The entire field pulsed like a living body. "You are the first harvest that remembers being human." I said nothing. There was no wind, no sound. When he left, the barn began to tremble. The boards creaked, and the floor cracked open as if something enormous was waking up beneath it. The cornfield outside bent in perfect waves, all moving in the same direction. Toward me, I ran. But the more I ran, the further the field stretched. The sun didn't move. The clouds didn't change. It was as if time had stopped or revolved around me. Until I saw it. The farmhouse, identical to the old one, only new, freshly painted. And on the porch, a woman waved at me, smiling. Behind her, a child played in the dirt. "Daddy, come see." The sound hit me like thunder. My throat went dry. The boy, he had my eyes. The same ones. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The ground vibrated, and the entire field responded to the child's voice, as if it recognized him. Arthur appeared again in the distance, watching, and said only one thing before fading among the rows of corn. "The land always reclaims what belongs to it." The morning light warped, turning everything white. And then silence. They say some old farms keep producing, even when no one lives there anymore. That the soil is too fertile, that nothing really dies in it. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's because sometimes what grows from the earth isn't what was planted, but what was forgotten. If you've ever walked down a rural road and felt the ground tremble beneath your feet, maybe it wasn't the wind. Maybe it was the harvest trying to remember you. And remember, not every root stays underground. Some still walk among us. See you in the next story.